illustrate, though, the message of this text. Because in Lutheran seminaries, they preach on the text. Let the text speak to you, and then you speak what it speaks to the people. But as I think about my ordination, I can still feel the pressure of 5 big men on my head when they ordained me. And they did press, and they did pray, and I did get ordained. And somehow in that process, they say, okay, now go do it. So the day after that Sunday afternoon, I drove 2 hours to Potter, Nebraska to my first call. And by the 1st of July, I was on the job. And a Sunday came soon, the next Sunday after my ordination, so I had to preach a sermon, which I did. And back then there was communion only on the first Sunday, but of course that would have been communion too. That was in July. So I began that Sunday preaching on whatever text was for that Sunday. And in the story we have for today, as I prepared for this, the text is about 2 healings by Jesus combined into one story on just one day of his ministry upon the earth. And as usual, a crowd had gathered. And as they were walking with Jesus, one of the rulers of their synagogue, Jairus by his name, came and fell at Jesus' feet and said, "My daughter's dying, come and save her." He had enough faith to say, "Jesus, if you just lay your hands on her, she will be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. Now the great crowd went with him, and they followed along and pressed about him. And then we're told there was a woman in the crowd, and she'd had a problem for 12 years, and had suffered much under many doctors and spent all the money to them, I guess, and still wasn't any better. As a matter of fact, she was getting worse. But she'd heard about Jesus. And so she came up and she said in her mind, if I can only touch his clothes or his garment, I'll be made well. She believed he had that much power. And immediately she did it, and her hemorrhage stopped. And she felt that her body was healed. And Jesus also perceived that some power had gone out from him. And he turned around and said, "Who touched me?" Now the disciples thought he was kind of crazy at that moment because everybody was touching him. They were all pushing on him. And they were bumping him, and the crowd was all around. But Jesus knew that somebody had touched with faith and a power had left, and she turned around to see who, and the woman knew what had happened to her, and she thought, well, I better be honest. So she came in fear and trembling, and she fell down at Jesus' feet. She told him the whole truth. And Jesus said to her, as we heard in the text, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. You're healed of your disease." But immediately after that, then somebody comes from Jairus' house and says, "Your daughter's dead. Don't bother Jesus anymore." But Jesus says, "Oh, don't be afraid. Just believe." And so they kept going. And they got to the house, and he went inside, and he said, "She's not dead, she's just sleeping." And the people that were inside laughed at him, so Jesus put them outside. Just took the mother and father in the family into the room where the girl was, and he just took her hand and he lifted her up and he said, "Little girl, rise up." And she got up and she walked, and she was 12 years old, and the family was overcome with amazement. So what do we make of this? 2 stories into one story. Well, here's a woman who had too much blood flow for 12 years, and a 12-year-old girl who didn't have enough blood flow force to get from childhood into womanhood. In fact, the woman's trouble began when the girl was born. And so we have a life and death conditions of 2 different natures in the same story. For the woman, there was excessive blood flow and it was wasted.